Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we are finally going to be talking about the debut album from Creeper called Eternity in Your Arms. But before we begin, let's go back about a decade to the pop rock scene in 2006-2007. This was the heyday in the years of My Chemical Romance, Panic at the Disco, Fall Out Boy, and the peak of the mainstream emo boom that would turn about a third of teenagers in North America seen that year. Now, as I said in the past, I wasn't exactly one of them. I was knee-deep in symphonic and power metal at the time. Clearly, I was embracing darker, heavier material. But that didn't mean I wasn't aware of or appreciate the music that was getting airplay around that time, but it became very noticeable that beyond the catchy, radio-friendly melodies, mainstream pop rock, it was embracing a certain image that was a little bit more baroque, for lack of better words, drawing on horror kitsch to craft a very plainly theatrical image and style. And of course, this was not new. The mainstream music scene has always had a habit of pulling on horror trends to construct some weird or creepy style that occasionally blend into their instrumentation, often using theatricality to blunt things from getting too weird, with the exception of the 90s alternative scene, of course, which frankly got away with a bewildering amount in retrospect. But it tends to come in waves of popularity, often crashing hard at the point of overexposure, which, and last time in for mainstream emo and pop rock around 2009 and so, at the beginning of the club boom. So fast forward to, well, now, and the debut of an English horror punk band called Creeper, who has been building some buzz in their native country with a few EPs since their formation in 2014. Now, I had heard a lot of good things going in, not just inspired by My Chemical Romance, but also going back to glam rock, the Misfits, and even Meatloaf in their embrace of theatrical bombast. Now, the last time I had heard someone adjacent in this vein cite similar inspirations, that was Kyle Kraft, and his debut album last year, Dolls of Highland, was a criminally underappreciated masterpiece, and thus I had a lot of curiosity going into this, especially as it's been getting, frankly, astounding amounts of critical acclaim, a lot more than I would expect for this specific genre. So okay, with Eternity in Your Arms, are we on the cusp of something really big and really great here? Well, folks, there are some reviews that require a lot of deeper consideration and complex thought, that demand a rewrite or two to get precisely at what I want to say, for albums that demand a dozen or so listens to really understand. Creeper's Eternity in Your Arms is not one of those albums. Indeed, this might be one of the easiest reviews I've put together in some time, and it's because, for once, from the very first listen, I knew exactly what this album was trying to do. And none of this is saying that it's bad. Far from it. I'd easily go on record saying this album is a ton of fun and is too top-loaded with terrific hooks and absurd bombast to not be great. But there's also a part of me that recognizes high camp melodrama when I hear it, and that there's kind of a limit to how seriously I can take this overall. Make no mistake, it is great, but it doesn't quite get to that higher level to transcend that camp. And since I'm certain what I just said is going to end up getting misunderstood, let me take a bit of a step back in time to explain what camp and melodrama actually are. The latter is easier, where drama often appeals to character reason, or at least progressions that make some logical sense. Melodrama plays more on emotional logic that can fly against common sense. Now, there is of course a place for melodrama in art, particularly pop music. For me, they tend to work best when they pump up the bombast, or go for overheated, oversexed, often a theatrical picture, which is where camp comes in. More of an aesthetic style than a genre, camp often plays up the cheesiness and the big emotions and garish or exaggerated tones. And yet, for all of its wild silliness when considered from a certain amount of ironic distance, if a great campy melodrama can suck you in, it can be just as emotionally viable, or as deftly insightful and smart as proper drama. Now, my immediate go-to example of how this can work masterfully, beyond an extended list of musicals that have completely embraced this style, is Meatloaf's classic album, Bat Outta Hell from 1977. And yes, I said classic, because Meatloaf's, between his complete committed and fiercely passionate delivery and Jim Steinman's brilliant writing and arrangements, they still managed to smuggle in an impressively detailed, nuanced, and textured picture at the heights of teenage emotion into the package of an absurd, overblown melodrama. Kyle Kraft's Dolls of Highland works in the exact same way, as do so many of the metal records that inevitably make my year-end list, particularly in the power and symphonic metal variety. And also, though I know some die-hard fans will refuse to admit it, so does My Chemical Romance's The Black Parade. And again, that's not taking away from the viability of the emotional experience of its lurid power. That's actually a fundamental part of why that art works so well. But come on here, it's been a decade since that album came out. Take a step back with any self-awareness, and especially when you look at the lyrics, it's a classic example of campy gothic melodrama, and arguably one of the best that came out in mainstream pop rock. And man, you can so tell that Creeper really wants to fit into that mold so badly. Frontman Will Gould doesn't shy away from a howling, outsized Meatloaf imitation on a fair few songs, with perhaps a little bit more of a punk edge to compensate for not quite having the same range or huge emotional presence. And in a choice that I would argue is outright inspired, they have Hannah Greenwood sing the Ellen Foley counterpoint and even take the lead altogether on Crickets. I'll come back to why this works so goddamn well when we talk about the content, but the funny thing is that when you break away from the theatrical vocals, this is actually a pretty straightforward punk record. Sure, Black Rain opens with the pianos, and there are definitely points that ease back for some rattling bass to amp up that moody intensity, and using the slightly bigger mix to emphasize that darker theatricality with all the multi-tracking. But outside of some strings that show up on Crickets or the piano and the closer I Choose to Live, this is a surprisingly lean record. The drum work is incredibly aggressive, the bass grooves are tightly balanced against the sharper, more melodic guitar lines, and this record doesn't waste any time with grandiose instrumental digressions or solos, more willing to shift up the tone entirely to fill time in the song instead. And yeah, some of those tonal shifts hit with an audible thud for me. Poison Pen is almost so furious it can't change direction easily, which is a bit of a problem. The darker pivot on Down Below doesn't really work as well, and for as much as I love the harsher edge on Room 309, the shift to get to that outro was almost an audible thud for me again. But again, that's not saying the hooks that we do get aren't amazing, because they definitely are. Black Rain, Suzanne, Hiding with Boys, Darling, even the ballads Misery, Crickets, and I Choose to Live, these are all great songs, almost to the point where you realize that they could have been so much bigger, so much more epic, for lack of better words, if Creeper have opted for more in the arrangement. This record is a lean 37 minutes, and it could have easily been longer to emphasize some of that gothic grandeur, to step more in the vein of the Black Parade, or to give the guitarists a little bit more time to show off a bit. They got some talent here. The melodic hooks, they are tight enough that they could hold up going into longer territory, especially when you spot the obvious Meatloaf lyrical callouts. It would be an obvious choice. And that's the other thing. When I said this record is lean, I refer to a lot of the writing as well. Outside of some profoundly silly moments, basically it plays out like a particularly bad breakup with all the overheated melodrama that comes with it. From the partners screaming at each other in the rain, to hooking up with new people, to the desperate plays to get the others back, and even in some cases get their attention. It becomes pretty clear early on that the girl dumped our protagonist, and you can definitely see him playing every wounded, manipulative card in the book in order to get our sympathy, and yet, this is a melodrama that tips its hand to the audience early, because for as human as he might be, as relatable as he might be, he's not exactly likable. That's why Crickets is easily the linchpin of why this album works for me, because it's a chance for the girl to unload back against all this guy's projection, admit her own flaws and going for condescending and arrogant dicks just like him, but also make it abundantly clear that no, she's not taking him back anytime soon. And at the end of the day, the guy comes around to acknowledge that, yeah, he kind of is a dick. This girl is clearly left town. Dating girls who are just like her isn't doing him any favors, and he actually has to take a step to pull out of that downward spiral. Really, the text and the subtext of this record is resoundingly strong, but again, for as strong as it is, I'm not sure it's got the level of detail and flavor to rise above into that truly grandiose territory. This is where greater song length could help Creeper a little bit more, give them the room to add more lyrical detail and metaphor beyond the profoundly silly lines, and beyond some of just the bare bones here. Make the writing have a little bit more of a poetic edge to it. Again, fantastic foundation, but when looking at more beyond it, it can feel a little bit bare bones overall, and that can hurt some of the melodramatic swell that it's clearly trying to achieve here. But as a whole, this is easily a great record. I definitely like where Creeper are going. The style's a very easy sell for me. I do wish the writing had a little bit more detail and flair to go along with all the gothic touches that they keep trying to nudge in. And again, it's very clear when Creeper are drawing from in order to build their sound, almost to the point where you wish they had diversified a little bit more, gone a little bit further away from their influences. Again, I keep pointing at Kyle Craft's Dolls of Highland, which actually did that. In comparing debuts, even on a thematic level, there are some parallels. But still, Easy 8 out of 10, high recommendation, definitely check this out. It's a lean and potent punk record from a really promising group. I definitely want to hear more. And hell, I hope this gets big, because it really would deserve to. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. Like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Yeah, I know I'm a little late to the punch with this, because everyone and their mother is telling you this album is great, and it is. Check it out, it's a lot of fun. If you want to buy the record, the link's in the description below, and I got the poll up there for everyone to tell me how wrong I am and how this should just be a perfect 10. Really, it actually was closer to getting that 9 out of 10. It was close, but I wish there was a little more to it, a little more meat. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get more involved in my increasingly jammed up schedule, a link to my Patreon is right there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week on Saturdays you get to add records or you get to add movies to that schedule. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.